Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason De La Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have done it, football fans. We have made it past the end of the football season. All of the state championships have been decided, and we have another winner from Texoma. We have a couple adjacent from Texoma as well, but the Gunner Tigers do it again. 28-0 against Woodville to win the Class 3A Division II state title for the third straight year. For the fifth time in 9 seasons, they are your state champions. Frontier Golf Carts Texoma experience the thrill of savings to celebrate their new Denison location, proudly serving the greater Texoma area, where they're launching with the lowest prices of the year. This marks an exciting new chapter in the 11-year history of Frontier Golf Carts as they expand from their original location in Salina. For their grand opening, come see the awesome collection of new carts with up to $1,500 off, including the 2024 Frontier EV Lightning F4 with all seats facing forward. New lithium battery-powered golf carts with backup cameras and touchscreen entertainment start at $7,495. Visit frontiergolfcarts.com or check out their Facebook page for the latest specials. So we had another state champion, the same state champion we've had the last 3 years, doing it again in a defensive battle to the fullest. I would say in terms of all 5 of these championships that Gunner has won, this was the toughest one, and 28-0 doesn't look tough, but the way this game happened for the nearly 10,000 people that were in attendance, I'm sure all the people watching at home on TV, listening on the Gunner stream, following this team in this past near decade of dominance that they've had, saw how tough this game was from the start. And we talked coming in that it was probably going to be the defenses that were going to decide it. Obviously facing a new opponent in Woodville. We talked about their athleticism. We talked about the way they like to control the game with their running game. The athletes that they have on both sides of the ball. They did a very good job in the semifinals against Tidehaven to hold that team to 21 points. So it was going to be interesting to see, after watching what Gunner did against Wall, how would Woodville handle Gunner offensively. And to be fair, it was the best job that anybody has done in losing to Gunner in the championship game. Newton, obviously, in winning that title back in 2017, did a really good job. And the loss to Franklin was a shootout, 49-35, a game that was tied at 35 going to the fourth quarter. So this was the first time since that 2017 year that Gunner was really tested in a state championship game by an opponent's defense. And it's scoreless after the first quarter. It looks like both offenses are struggling to find what can work. There's some penalties that sabotage some drives. There's obviously really good individual efforts to force third and longs, that sort of thing. And then we get early in the second quarter, and obviously this will be an all phases type of game for Gunner to be able to win. And the first real big play that took place was on special teams, and it was a 34-yard punt return by Easton Overman. And that set up Gunner at the Woodville 29-yard line. And that was obviously one of the better field position starts of the day. It was one of those situations where, at the very least, because you have Preston Tarpley as a weapon from a kicking standpoint, that just from that point, you're talking obviously a mid-40s field goal, which he's shown he can make. But even if you don't get a first down, if you just get it closer, if you can get it near the 20-yard line to make it a kick in the 30s, then you feel pretty good that you're going to get points at a minimum. And Gunner took that off the board almost immediately. Brock Body runs a couple times, gets a first down, and then Cole Harpole catches a 18-yard touchdown pass from Preston Tarpley. He's wide open, just short of the goal line, backpedals in. Less than 2 minutes in the second half, or excuse me, into the second quarter, it's 7-0 Gunner. And you're thinking, okay, here we go. They got some momentum. They put together a couple good plays, but it ends up staying 7-0 at halftime. And Gunner's getting the ball to open the second half. And at that point, I think everybody in the press box, everybody watching at home is saying, if Gunner goes down and scores and gets up 2 touchdowns, the way Woodville was playing offensively, they were going to have trouble even at 14-0. And it didn't even take a possession for Gunner to have that lead because Mitchell Gage opens the third quarter, 96-yard kickoff return, 14 seconds into the third quarter, gets the ball on, he's on the right side, ends up getting some blocks, stays on that side of the field, weaves around a guy, gets past the kicker, 96-yard kickoff return for a score. It's 14-0. It's the longest 3A title game kickoff return. It's the second longest all time in state title game history behind a 97-yarder, and it was pretty much over at that point. You say 14-0, there's plenty of time left. You basically have the whole, second half to go. But again, Woodville was not doing anything at all offensively that made you think that was an insurmountable lead. But that's a huge play. That's a back-breaking play because Woodville went into halftime and their coaches are saying, look, these guys are the 2-time defending champs. You are right there with them. It is 7-0. You have basically played them even, except for 3 plays. All we have to do is get another touchdown. The pressure's going to be on them. It'll be 7-7. Everybody thought this was not going to be a close game. You guys are doing exactly what we need to do to pull off this upset and get our first championship. And then that return by Gage happens. It was the second kickoff return in 3 games for him. He opened the second half against Holiday, again another game that was semi-close at halftime. Again, it was the feeling that Gunner had a commanding hand on the game, even though it was manageable from an overall score standpoint. But he went out, ran back the opening kickoff to the third quarter in that game, and then you basically said, well, that's it. The Holiday's not coming back from that. And this had that sort of feel with how the game was being played on the field. And I say that because Gunner took that feeling after their next touchdown, which we're about to get to, and they basically kind of saw how this game was going from Woodville's perspective and said, we just don't need to do anything super crazy. Now, they kind of did because they went for a kill shot, but after forcing Woodville to punt on their first possession of the third quarter, they get the ball back, and they end up hitting a big pass play. Cash Rumage, 59 yards on a deep throw from Tarpley up the right seam. And now it's 21-0. You get these 2 big plays in the span of barely 3 minutes. And with 8:57 left, it's 21-0. And at that point, you really got the sense Woodville has not done anything. They're not going to score 3 touchdowns in a quarter and a half. They would be lucky to get 1. And I think Gunner attacked the rest of the game in that fashion. There was one play that they got the ball back on a poor punt. There was a bad snap, and there was a poor punt that they got really good field position. And the first play they tried a reverse flea flicker, and Woodville got pressure on it, so Tarpley couldn't get his full effort behind the throw because it had a chance to be open, and they were trying to go for a kill shot and make it 28-0 in the middle of the third quarter, and it was an interception, and that was Gunner's only turnover of the game. But Woodville didn't do anything with it, and it was basically like a punt. And I think that was, and Coach Fizell said afterwards they were trying for that kill shot. They were being a little greedy considering the situation, and they knew they were up 21-0. They were trying to really put it away, but they could afford to do that because there was nothing going on the other end. And then after that play, I think Gunner went super conservative because they could. They ran the ball They were trying to get first downs. They were trying to run the clock out at that point. Again, at that point, you're talking, it's getting to the late third quarter. You just wanted to limit Woodville's possession. And part of that was the Eagles did not come out of their normal offense. Until unfortunately it was too late in the fourth quarter, because they wanted to run the ball. They are a running team. That's what they do. Well, Woodville ran the ball 38 times for 54 yards. Obviously, that's not very good. That's not going to get the job done in any game for the most part, let alone a state championship game. But they wanted to keep running, and it was essentially just getting rid of more clock. They would get it. They would get a yard. They would get 2 yards. They would, and the clock is just running. Once they got down 14-0, honestly, they probably should have thrown more. But the Gunner pass rush was so good in this game. They had 6 sacks. Luke Babin for Woodville. We talked about him coming in. He's a sophomore. He's a tall guy. He's got the look of a quarterback. There were a lot of D1 schools that have already offered him, but he's a sophomore. This is the biggest game of his life. We've talked about this whole run for Woodville. They had never been past the second round before this year, and you have all these Gunner guys. You know, this is the fourth championship game that they've been on the sidelines on or played in. Everybody knows what it was like. This was all new for Woodville. And Gunner really turned up the pressure. You saw it right from the start. Major Thornhill had 2 sacks early. Hayden Farrell finished with 3 sacks. He ended up being the defensive MVP. He finished with 11 tackles, 5.5 for a loss. Babin was sacked 6 times total. And I get that you don't want to put a kid like that in a bad position, but at some point you just had to realize they could not move the ball, and they ended up finishing with 147 total yards on 61 plays. Babin ended up with 2 interceptions. One of them led to the final score of the game in the middle of the fourth quarter. Brock Body with a 63-yard interception return. Tried to make a throw over the middle. Body jumped in front of the receiver, actually tipped it to himself, and then was able to get to the right sideline, went down the sideline for that interception. And then on the next possession for Woodville, Mitchell Gage comes up with an interception. So he made a play on defense in addition to his special teams. And that's how we got to 28-0. Now, the Gunner offense was not much better than Woodville. If you look at the final numbers, Gunner had 10 first downs. Woodville only had 9. We mentioned Woodville ran the ball 38 times for 54 yards. Gunner ran it 34 times for 84 yards. It's a little bit better. And if you take out the 2 kneel downs at the end, they ran it 32 times for 95 yards. So that's not terrible. It's better. Like I said, it's definitely better than 38 for 54. Woodville threw for 93 yards. Preston Tarpley ended up 9 of 15 for 120 yards with his interception. But the difference was they were able to, one, grind out some possessions, but they hit the big plays. Brock Body, in addition to his interception return for a touchdown, 15 carries for 51 yards. We mentioned what Tarpley did. Cash Rumage was the offensive MVP. He had 2 catches for 73 yards, and including that 59-yard touchdown. Harpole with the 2 catches for 24 yards and his touchdown. And it was kind of hit and miss with some other guys. Hayden Farrell actually ended up being the second leading rusher as he came on late to kind of seal the deal, to help run the clock out. He had 3 carries for 18 yards. Jay Campidi 5 for 17. Overman had a couple catches for 10 yards. But it was very deliberate by Gunner's offense, and I think obviously that's by design when you see that the other team cannot move the ball. For those who follow me on Twitter, I put out Woodville had 14 possessions in this game. 10 of them ended in punts. 1 of them ended in a turnover on downs. 1 was the end of the first half where they ran like 2 plays and then said, okay, we're going home because we're at the 20-yard, our own 20-yard line. And then the 2 interceptions. And like I said, you had 9 first downs as part of 14 possessions. And Gunner just didn't want to make any mistakes. They didn't want to give the ball to Woodville in near midfield or on their side of the field trying to force something. But you make a big throw to a wide open guy in Harpole for a touchdown. You hit a guy in stride for a 59-yard pass for a touchdown, and then you get a special plays touchdown. You get a defensive touchdown, and that's how you win a game. We saw it with the game against Wall. They did the things they did because they had to get back in this game. They were trailing. They had to pull out some stuff. They had to, be aggressive to try to get back into it, and they were able to come back and pull that out. And I think obviously in hindsight, everybody thought going into the semifinals that the winner of Gunner Wall was going to win the championship. That was the de facto state championship. We've seen that with Gunner Canadian a couple of times. Everybody felt that the winner of that matchup was going to go on and win state, and usually that was the case. And I think that was going to be the case this year. I think Wall is obviously, if anybody was paying attention to this game, they would have said we would have done that exact same thing to Woodville. If not, they may have given up some points, but they obviously would have probably scored some more points because of the way they like to attack defenses with their passing game. I think they would have hit some of the same big plays that Gunner did. But you can only play the game that's in front of you. You can only play the opponent that's in front of you. And Gunner was able to do that. And for them to continue this amazing run has been so much fun to cover because things like this do not happen every day. I mean, we do talk about the big programs that have had success. You look at just this week, Salina, who Gunner actually played tougher than the team they beat in the 4A Division I championship game, Kilgore. They win their 9th title. It's their first time since the mid 2000s, but they have that history. A team like Carthage won this week. They won their 10th title, and that's one of the few teams in this recent run for Gunner that you could say would switch places. There's not very few people that would switch places. You have the Elitos of the world. On this stage again, you saw people playing for championships. They didn't win it, but Highland Park was back in a championship game, and South Lake Carroll back in a championship game. Austin Westlake, all the big 5A and 6A programs that we've seen over the last decade and beyond that continue to get here, continue to rack up these titles and these impressive seasons. Gunner is now in that pantheon for what they've done the last 9 years. You talk about 133-8 record in 9 seasons. You've got less losses than total seasons played. And the run that started in 2016 is now state championship, state runner-up, state semifinalist, champion, semifinalist, runner-up, champion, champion, champion. And that's a run that, like I said, there's outside of Carthage, I don't know if there's anybody who you would trade places with because you have 5 championships. Just on the championships alone, you have 5 championships in 9 seasons. But to always get to the Final Four, what they've done has been so impressive, knowing the pressure that's been on them, knowing obviously it is not the same cast of characters from a player standpoint. There has been the churn of graduation throughout this run, and up until there's been the first part of that run, there were different quarterbacks every year. It's not been this one guy was the quarterback for 3 or 4 seasons and then handed it off to the next guy who was a quarterback for 3 or 4 seasons. It has been so impressive to watch what they've done, and again to live up to the hype, to be seen as the favorite for a championship, and then to go out and do it. And again, I will point out, not especially the last 3 years, if it wasn't for having to play Anna and Salina, because it has become so tough for Gunner to find an opponent, you could be looking at 3 straight undefeated seasons, not just 3 championships, which again is impressive enough to pull off, because that's a rare feat. We'll talk about that in a second. But to go 16-0 and then 16-0 and then 14-2 with the 2 losses again to Salina, who won the 4A Division I championship, and to an Anna team in 5A Division II that made the region semifinals, so was one of the top 16 teams left in that 5A bracket, says a lot about Gunner being able to bounce back from that. I don't think in the long run that hurt them at all, except for the fact maybe that they were beat up and had to deal with injuries from those games, but because those results were in the end were not going to change the goal. Once they got into the 3A, once they got into the district schedule, once they got into the playoffs, we've seen it was very unlikely that anybody was going to beat them. And their toughest game was by far the Wall game in the semifinals, and they ended up winning that by double digits. And if it wasn't for them having to schedule Ann and Salina because the fact that they had trouble finding people that wanted to play them, and again, for good reason, why would you want to play somebody who just won back-to-back undefeated state championships? Logistically, you could be sitting here saying this team has won 3 straight undefeated championships, is sitting here at 48 wins in a row going into next season, and it is a dynasty. It's this whole run has been a dynasty. But again, you talk about only 20 programs had won at least 3 straight championships. Gunner became number 20 in the whole state. There are now 29 schools that have won 5 total championships. That's the company now that Gunner is keeping. And again, it's all come in this condensed time, which makes it even more impressive that, they don't have to say, well, we won this one title back in 1937 and then we won one in 1962 and then you add in these last 3. It's literally all since 2016. And again, Carthage is really Carthage and Aledo are probably the only 2 teams in this stretch that would say, yeah, we would swap places with you. And again, it was just a masterclass performance defensively. And I went back and looked. Again, if you follow me on Twitter at Jason De La Rosa, I put this out when I got home, looking up some stuff and doing some follow work on the story about them winning. If you take the championship game, you take the state semifinal against Wall, you take the region final against Holiday, and you take the region semifinal against Jacksboro. So you're basically talking about the 4 toughest opponents that you were supposed to play. The last 4, the best teams that you could face. They allowed 153 yards rushing on 119 carries. I'll say that again. In the last 4 games of this playoff run, Gunner faced Jacksboro, Holiday, Wall, and then Woodville. They allowed 153 yards on 119 carries. That's less than 1.3 yards per carry. I mean, that's insane. I mean, giving up 153 yards in a game is decent, is okay. To do what they were able to do defensively on the ground is just crazy, and that has been the calling card. And I've said this to people, all through this run. It has been the way all through this run. If you cannot run the ball against Gunner, and it usually is pretty evident from the start of the game. If you cannot run the ball against Gunner, you will not win these big games because they put you in the bad situations that unleashes their pass rush. They control the line of scrimmage, and once they get ahead, even if it's a game like this where it's only 7 or 14-0, you can't string anything together. And it makes you that much more predictable and one-dimensional because there is no threat of moving the ball on the ground. And it has been this way the whole way through. If you look at every one of Gunner's championship wins, even against teams that come in and that is what they do, a Paul Pewitt runs the slot T. Unfortunately for Paul Pewitt, Gunner plays in a district with somebody who runs a pretty good slot T in Bells, so they know how to deal with it. It's not like they were seeing that for the first or second time. All of those games, whether you have a quarterback that can run the ball like Bowling did in the very first one, if you have a running offense like Paul Pewitt did, or like Woodville coming in, having 3 capable backs that helped get them there because they like to run the ball. If you cannot run the ball against Gunner, you will not win. And the 2 teams that have shown they can, Newton in 2017, Franklin in 2021, those teams were able to beat Gunner in the title game because they had guys. They had an offense that could control the line of scrimmage better than anybody else, but they could run the ball, get big chunks, keep the game on their terms. If Gunnar does what it does in games like Thursday, you don't have a shot, because then you're forced to do things that you don't want to do. You're forced into tough situations, having to go forward on fourth downs, having to be more aggressive maybe on defense, and then that opens up something for Gunnar to take advantage of. It's been that way the whole way through. And they're going to lose a bunch of kids, but we say this every year about, when's this run going to end? How are these guys going to continue it? Well, you hate to bring up the negative of winning a championship. And unfortunately, these last 2 years, Gunnar has essentially won with its best defensive player not being able to play. We talked about Colin Peacock's injury. Here's a kid that signed with Baylor that is going to play in the Big 12, is that caliber of athlete, has been up with these guys, a couple of these guys as part of a state track qualifier, a medal winner in the relays, and he gets hurt in that game against Holiday. They didn't have him the last 2 games. Imagine, you sit here and say, imagine how good their defense would be if he had been out there. I mean, like I said, that's what, and I wrote this as part of the story. That's what I feel like when you look at this year's Gunnar team compared to some of the last ones. This was, it felt like I don't say a total team effort, but more of a team effort. Who is the superstar on this group? Who is the guy that everything, or the 2 guys that everything would revolve around? And the last couple of years it was Walker Overman at quarterback, the dual threat. You had a guy in Cannon Lemberg as a receiver. You go back to some of the early teams, the Dylan Jances, the Trey Carrs. There were multiple guys, or one guy that it was. This is the bell cow. This is where we're gonna go. And this group, it didn't really have that. Brock Body had a very good season. He led them in touchdowns at 18, but he wasn't that far ahead from some of the other guys in scoring. There were multiple guys that had 10 touchdowns. 11, Mitchell Gage, Dylan Tokars. It wasn't a consistent, like, man, every game it's this guy. There were, the championship game is a perfect example of that. Cash Rummage has never scored a varsity touchdown, and they go deep to him on that pass, and he hauls it in, breaks away from a defender, and gets the only touchdown of his career in the third quarter of the state championship game to give the team a 21-0 lead. There were just so many stories of guys having to fill in, like I said, with Peacock's injury early in the season. Guys were filling in, coming back. There was just so much depth on this team that you could go to guys in different situations. This week, Boston Standridge didn't have any catches. Last week, he was one of the leaders in catches, and they needed every one of those catches last week to be able to get this win. A guy like Mitchell Gage, who does not touch the ball a whole lot on offense, 2 weeks ago against Holiday, didn't have a catch. I don't think he had a touch offensively, but he had that big kickoff return to basically seal that win. And then the next week against Wall, he catches 2 touchdowns and is the leading receiver, albeit only with 3 catches. And that's what I think is the story of this group, that it took everybody, that you don't look at a box score like some of these other schools and you see the same guy scoring 4 touchdowns, or it's the quarterback throwing for 4 touchdowns. It is 4 seniors in all 3 phases making the plays to get to the end zone, and it felt like it was that all season with this group. And I think that, like I said, that is the story of the 2024 Gunnar Tigers. And yes, they're going to lose a lot. but there are guys waiting in the wings, and we have said this again from the start of this run in 2016. There are guys waiting their turn, and it may be they only get a year, maybe they get 2 years. As we've seen with some of these guys, they do end up starting for 3 years, but there are guys behind them that are capable. And then once they get that chance, once they are able to get on the field because they had to wait their turn, they are ready to go. And you always sit there and say, well, how are they going to replace this guy? And how are they going to, they're going to lose all these guys on the defensive line, and they're going to have to replace guys in the secondary, and all these receivers are graduating. They're ready to go. I mean, the JV obviously had a really good year. Their freshman group was really good. It was funny, it's all part of the connective tissue in this group. Talking with Brock Body leading into the championship game, and obviously everybody brings up the losses to Anna and Salina, and he said, that was the first time for the senior class that we had lost since like 6th grade. And they didn't really know what it was going to be like because they had never done it before. And that's where this group, this whole program is that you can have a senior group like that 2 games into their senior year suffer the first loss they've had in like 6 years. And that's because of the expectation. That's obviously because of the work that they put in. Garen Getz, after the game in the press conference, basically said, hey, look, we started this back January 9th was the date that he threw out there. You coming back from Christmas break after winning the last one. And it's a whole year's worth of stuff. It's being able to do the offseason stuff. Obviously, this year, Gunner went down to 7-on-7. They won that. Being able to compete against those people and having success. And then once you get into, fall practice and 2 days, whatever you want to call them now, and then going through the 16 games, it's literally a 12-month process for them now. And they've got it down to a science about where they want to be at each point in the year to be able to make this possible. At some point, this run is going to end because all runs end. Lake Travis holds the all-time record with 5 straight championships. That run ended at some point. So this is going to end at some point. Is it likely that it's going to be next year? I don't know. Again, you talk about a group that has a chance to continue this run. Obviously, from the looks of it, Wall has a lot of those guys back. So I think at the very least, you could be talking about a rematch there in the semifinals. Woodville is obviously going to be feeling like we need to get back with some of the people that they have. But they're going to have some attrition due to graduation as well. But no matter what, it has just been an amazing ride again to watch this group be able to pull this off, especially with 3 straight championships. It's don't take it for granted. Now is the time to look ahead, but it is just to talk about where they are as a program. They are now among, if they weren't already, which you could probably say that they were. 5 is, I don't want to say it's not super rare air, but it is definitely rare. And it's one of those, now you say nice round numbers to talk about teams. When you talk about accomplishments, 5 is a healthy number. And again, when you talk about the only, some of the only teams that have won 5, that are sitting at 5, you have a Canadian, you have Allen, you have Ennis, you have Galena Park North Shore, Lamarck, Newton, Refugio, Sealy, Sonora, Stanford, and now you have Gunner. The only teams that are ahead of you as a program in terms of championships won. Aledo has 12. Carthage now has 10. Katy and Salina have 9. And then you have Mart, South Lake Carroll, Abilene. Martin and South Lake Carroll have 8. Abilene, Brownwood, and Plano have 7. Breckenridge, Converse Judson, Dangerfield, Highland Park, Lake Travis, Odessa Permian, Stephenville, Waco, Wichita Falls all have 6. I mean, those are the storied names in Texas high school football history. And that's the reason, because they have all these championships. They have this winning pedigree, and now Gunner is at that point. You're talking about, you have more than Austin Westlake. You have more than Amarillo. You have more than Albany and Gilmer and Shiner, West Orange Stark. Again, programs that people know just by name because they're always having success. And it continues. It's continuing, and that's why you don't want to say take it for granted, because it's still an ongoing circumstance. But don't take for granted how hard it is, the effort and the work that these kids and coaches have to put in to keep this run going. And so, who knows what next year is going to bring? I would assume a lot of people are going to say, well, Gunner's the favorite till somebody beats them. And obviously that they are the champion until somebody can knock them off. And then beyond that, we're going to be entering realignment in February of 2026. We'll see if Gunner goes up. They're on the threshold of 3A Division I, and obviously that's going to lead to new challenges, new opponents in Region 2. A higher level of play as you move up the ladder. That's just the fact of life. So even if they somehow win, four in a row next year, people are going to say, if they move up in realignment, well, it's, how are you going to win now? Because you have to face the Malakoffs and the Grandviews and all the people that are in Region 2 for 3A Division 1. The road may not be as easy, or they may just keep rolling on based on what they do. It has just been an amazing run, and it was, especially on a defensive standpoint, it was such a dominating performance. Again, to force 2 turnovers, to score on defense, to hold an opponent to under 150 yards in a state championship game, to shut somebody out in a state championship game. That's the first time that's happened in 3A since 2003. It was just it was a great performance, and you don't want to say it was a typical Gunner performance, because they've played in so many of these big games and found a way to win so many of them since 2016. So that's it. We had, again, a really good year in Texoma. We had some teams make some big moves in their performance, like Whitewright. We had some teams take some little steps up in their performance, like a Van Alstyne, able to win a district title this year after finishing as a runner-up. We had some unexpected performances. I don't know what people thought that Whitesboro was going to look like, because they were so young. I don't know if many people thought Collinsville was going to make the run that they did all the way back to the region final for the 3rd straight year, considering all the guys that they graduated. And unfortunately for the Pirates, they had to watch the team that beat them in the region final, Munster, go on and win a state championship. So that's the 3rd straight year that that Collinsville lost to the eventual 2A Division II state champion, Albany, the previous 2 years, and then Munster this year. We had Sherman win the Battle of the Axe for the first time in 13 years. We had a lot of good stuff, as always, a lot of great players, and that's what we come to expect here in Texoma for football, and 2024 was no exception. So it's going to be fun to see what happens in 2025. And then, like I said, realignment's going to come around. When we get closer to that, we can talk about everything that's going to happen there. I think we may have some movers and shakers in terms of what happens. A lot more compared to this last time when there wasn't a whole lot of movement. We thought there was, but in the end, nothing really changed for our teams. But 2025 is going to be around the corner, and we'll be back with the podcast in that regard for every week, previewing the season till the last team is standing, and for the last handful of years, it has been the Gunner Tigers after they win their third straight championship, 28-0 over Woodville, to three-peat in 3A Division 2. I want to thank everyone for listening to the podcast. I want to thank those who have been listening to the podcast, not just this year. If you found us this year, stick with us. And for those who go back, maybe as long as we've been doing the podcast, I thank you for that. I want to thank Frontier Golf Carts Texoma for joining us as a sponsor this year. Experience the thrill of savings to celebrate their new Denison location, proudly serving the greater Texoma area, where they're launching with the lowest prices of the year. This marks an exciting new chapter in the 11-year history of Frontier Golf Carts, as they expand from their original location in Salina. For their grand opening, come see the awesome collection of new carts, up to $1,500 off, including the 2024 Frontier EV Lightning F4 with all seats facing forward. New lithium battery-powered golf carts with backup cameras and touchscreen entertainment start at $7,495. Visit frontiergolfcarts.com or check out their Facebook page for the latest specials. So I hope Frontier Golf Carts Texoma will be back as a sponsor next season. If you would like to sponsor the podcast, your business, or if you know a business that would like to sponsor, contact Renee Marler at rmarler@cherryroad.com. Talk to her. She can hook you up joining on the podcast as a sponsor, sponsoring Football Player of the Week. Comes out obviously every week during the football season. We've got some other stuff that you might be able to get in on a sponsor. So check out Renee, rmarler@cherryroad.com, and jump in. You get in there early, and we'll make it happen. And again, thank you so much for those who listen every week, checking out the previews, checking out the recaps of the previous games. You can follow me on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it, at Jason De La Rosa. Follow us on our social media. We have stuff that gets posted at the Herald Democrat Facebook page and All-Texomaland Facebook page. If you just want the high school football stuff, instead of having to weed through the other stuff that we offer at the paper, follow the All-Texomaland page. You get the recaps. You get Player of the Week. In regards to the other sports that we do that every week. It comes out on Saturdays, and voting starts is Sunday to Wednesday. All the stuff that you need to know, you can find there throughout the year. And again, I appreciate everybody that supports the podcast, supports the paper, whether you're subscribing, following us on our social medias. Really appreciate that this time of year. I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas. We obviously have a little bit of a break before we get back into full swing district basketball. Soccer for Sherman Denison is about to start. We've got it's right around the corner. Softball and baseball are going to get going, and obviously we're going to have some good teams, making the playoffs in the other sports. And then you talk about in the spring, we always have kids going to state track. We always have kids going to state tennis. We always have kids going to state golf. And not just going to compete at the highest level, but winning medals, winning championships. And I expected another good second semester for what we have going on here in Texoma, at all levels. From 5A down to the 2A schools that we have. So follow us for that, so you can keep up with what's going on there. And again, for the final All-Texomaland podcast of the football season, we thank you for listening, and Merry Christmas.